Good morning, everybody. This is a live extreme weather briefing as we have a couple of big hail targets to watch today, anywhere from the Texas Hill Country all the way down into northern Mexico. Those are the two target areas that I'm watching very closely, especially this evening for a large hail threat. And Back to Basics Tour 2021 has been activated. And these are the two target areas that I'm going to be watching for. One is northern Mexico, just to the west of Del Rio. I think that there is going to be a hail or maybe even a tornado producer out there just off the mountains in northern Mexico. Many of the models, though, show that thing dying as it approaches the Rio Grande River later on this evening. That could lead to a reduced tornado threat, at least on the Texas side. Probably will have to cross the river into northern Mexico to really get some of the good stuff out there, including maybe even a tornado threat out there just on the Mexico side. And then we've got this front that is stalling out just a little bit. You can see these winds start to shift to more of an easterly direction back behind it. That means that this front is going to stall out just a little bit, become more of a stationary boundary, and that could become the focus for severe weather and hail impacts between Dallas, Fort Worth, and the Brownwood, San Angelo areas. You can see in some of this uncapped area, even some west-southwesterly winds there, some south-southeasterly winds just within this area of convective inhibition, but just a narrow swath of surface-based instability along and just to the east of that front is what I'm keeping a very close eye on. But I'm going to be doing a Back to Basics Tour intercept for the rest of 2021 here too. I'm just going to be focusing on getting some massive hailstones. That's my main mission out here. And also tornadoes, of course. But this pattern here is especially favorable for large hail potential. And let me show you some of the more detailed models here. This is the 12Z HRRR I am pulling up. And these are the 0 to 3 kilometer energy helicity index, and this is basically an overlap of the 0 to 3 kilometer storm relative helicity with surface-based instability. And you can certainly see the greatest instability is back here into northern Mexico. And so I'm trying to decide whether I drop down toward the Del Rio area and just wait for that supercell coming out of Mexico, or do I punch into northern Mexico and try to intercept that lone renegade supercell down there into northern Mexico. But you can certainly see the pipe of 0 to 3 kilometers shear and instability is streaming up the Rio Grande Valley there. And this is definitely the most favorable environment. The HRRR does seem to mix out those dew points, even down into northern Mexico just a little bit, looking at about 25-degree temperature dew point spreads. You do have kind of a classic high plane sounding with these easterly winds over a pretty deep layer, so you almost have this upslope in the lowest kilometer or two, flipping around to southwesterly winds. That's why the 0 to 3 kilometer shear is so good at capturing this flip around from these easterlies to the southwesterlies just above ground. Pretty steep lapse rates as well. But these are going to be some pretty high dew point spreads down here, Del Rio into northern Mexico. We're talking about 25-degree temperature dew point spreads. Now the dew point there is the green line, temperature is the red line, and basically the 25 degrees there, that's the difference between the temperature at the low levels and that dew point. But I do suspect that the HRRR is overdoing the mixing a little bit and bringing these dew points just a little bit too low. I wouldn't be surprised if we actually do hang in the mid to upper 60s there in Del Rio as that moisture is funneling up the Rio Grande Valley. In terms of wind shear, you got a textbook hail producing hodograph here. You've got a lot of mid and deep layer shear with those 40-knot mid-level winds coming in, mid and upper level winds, more than sufficient to evacuate that rain and the hail from the updraft. And then this represents those easterlies in the lowest couple of kilometers here, lowest kilometer or two. You've got these southeasterly winds in the low levels, and then they flip around to southwesterly, aloft, and eventually westerly and increasing in magnitude. And this is definitely a textbook hail-producing supercell down here in Del Rio. You can see a lot of big, thick cape down there as well. This dash line there, that's the parcel ascent. The red line there is the environmental temperature, and so wherever the parcel is greater than that red line, that's going to be positive buoyancy, and the magnitude at which it's greater than that red line contributes to a lot of cape, and you can see a pretty thick cape axis there. A little bit of a capping inversion that's going to be in place down near Del Rio as well. I'm excited to head down there and chase this renegade supercell. But I also might want to target a little bit further up along this stationary front. There could be some enhanced low-level shear right along this, maybe a little belt of easterly surface winds that's co-located with that instability. You can see some of these composite indices are just a little bit greater. The 0 to 3 kilometer EHI down into central Texas, just to the southwest of DFW. And that's basically where those southerly and easterly surface winds meet up with that boundary. There is a hint by the models that we're going to see more westerly winds across the southern Texas hill country down here, a little bit further down the front, closer to San Angelo, south of the Brownwood area. So I really need to decide whether I'm going to target just to the southwest of DFW within this environment, which there are some pretty good photographs and instability here. A little bit better thermodynamics. You can see a weaker cap a bit further north, but you do have these weaker wind fields also. But still, you're going to have big hail because you get up here at 500 and up to 300 millibars. You get 40 to 50 knots here out of the due west. Quite a bit of bulk shear between the surface where you have these slight easterlies at about 10 knots to 40 knots above. That's going to create about 40 to 50 knots of bulk shear between 0 and 6 kilometers. And that's definitely more than sufficient for a big-time hail threat and to get those long-lived mesocyclones. And you can see that the cap is definitely breached. And you also have thick cape up there as well. And that's why the Storm Prediction Center has that hatched area out for potentially significant hail later on today. There is basically 1%, I would say sub 2% tornado probabilities as well. And that's because these weaker low-level winds. You can see we've got 10 knots about a kilometer above the ground, easterly winds at the surface, but that's definitely weaker low-level shear. You need some stronger wind fields out there to realize a more substantial tornado threat. But that's at 0Z at 7 p.m., and you can see there's really no low-level jet response in this portion of Texas. It does appear that there is a bit of low-level funneling up the Rio Grande Valley here, up toward that Del Rio storm. So I wouldn't be surprised if further west, to the west of Del Rio across northern Mexico, if there is a chance of a tornado. You have some better photographs as well to the west of Del Rio. A little bit better moisture profiles too, 88 over 64, about 20 to 25 degree dew point spreads. You can see that cap on the Del Rio side of the river, but out over Mexico, no cap. Look at this south-southeasterly winds accelerating here as you go up as well. That's that funneling that's happening up the Rio Grande Valley. You have some stronger wind fields too at about 2 to 3 kilometers, 25 to 30 knots right there out of the southwest. Then accelerating up to 50 knots in the mid-levels, mid and upper levels of the atmosphere. So that's a pretty good sounding down there just to the west of Del Rio over northern Mexico. And this dry punch of air, basically an effective elevated mix layer. You do have some dry air here above 3 kilometers, and that contributes to steepening those lapse rates in the mid-levels of the atmosphere and making an environment that's even more conducive for hail. Here you can see the 4, 5, and 6 kilometer winds, 40 to 50 knots up there aloft. The 0 to 2 kilometer winds, you have these easterlies. Those are the easterlies funneling that moisture up the Rio Grande. So this is definitely the most favorable photograph I've found so far. But these storm motions are going to be moving really slow, about 10 knots out there. So really what's going to happen is that supercell is going to stall to the west of Del Rio. It's just going to sit there, probably produce a ton of lightning near Del Rio, but the thing is just going to inch toward the Rio Grande and may never even cross it. I could see it diving south just before it reaches the Rio Grande. It's just whether these 40 to 50 knot, 4, 5, and 6 kilometer winds are sufficient enough to pull that supercell across the Rio Grande and over Del Rio. Could be some significant hail though here in the Del Rio area as this supercell arrives, turns right near the Rio Grande. It could dump its hail core there, very close to Del Rio as well. And so I have to decide whether I'm going to be working the Del Rio target or working this frontal boundary in the hill country between Dallas, Fort Worth, and Brownwood. Definitely could be a massive hail producer there as well. And here's the HRRR showing those two targets very clearly. This is the 12Z HRRR. It's got that supercell clustering out by 7 p.m. as it's approaching the Rio Grande. Could be close enough to the Rio Grande to be dumping its hail core on Del Rio, but it also may just slide off to the southeast. And the models are definitely showing this area between Dallas-Fort Worth and Brownwood also having a supercell storm, and even that boundary convecting all the way back toward San Angelo as well. Look at that storm there, diving to the south by 1Z. Still got that supercell storm down there. It's on the Mexico side still, even at 9 p.m. So it shows that capping inversion really holding strong in the Del Rio area, and this storm just wanting to propagate off to the south here into that moisture axis. And it doesn't want to leave the favorable thermodynamics, and really those supercells just don't quite make it to Del Rio. So I'm leaning toward targeting this area of the Texas Hill Country between Dallas, Fort Worth, and Brownwood. And then once that storm starts to die, I could always drop to the southwest towards San Angelo once again as well. And there's also a snow event coming for Colorado, including the Colorado Foothills. Could be in excess of a foot out there to the west of Denver, especially the higher terrain above about 7,000 feet. So I want to break that down as well. But first, we got this hail event in the southern Texas Hill Country down to Del Rio to monitor. I'd like to look at the RAP analysis a bit here. But I think we're going to be dealing with these kind of lower end type of events, but they still could produce significant severe weather in terms of significant hail out here. This is the RAP forecast at 20Z. This is at 2 p.m. out here. And it shows a little bit of a Cape bulb here to the southwest of Dallas-Fort Worth that's associated with those more southerly winds. There could be a bit of a mesolow that migrates up this stationary boundary that helps to back those surface winds just a little bit out of the due south out ahead of it, and then veer the winds back to the southwest of it, off to the southwest of that 2500 Cape bulb. So really you have a choice between playing the Texas Hill Country just to the southwest of DFW, or play Del Rio and just sit in Del Rio all day, eat incredible Mexican food, and watch those supercells off to the west produce spider lightning over top the Del Rio area there near the Rio Grande. You can see these southeasterly surface winds funneling up the Rio Grande there. Already some Cape starting to build there in excess of 2,000 to the southeast of Del Rio. I'm sure you're probably feeling that moisture stream off to the north out there. A little bit of ridging aloft right now. And then you can start to see that cyclonic curvature start to overspread this zone just a little bit. Those mid and upper level winds. And look at the temperatures aloft, minus 13 and minus 14 here at 500 millibars. Definitely quite a bit of cold air in the mid levels of the atmosphere, contributing to those steep lapse rates and that large hail threat today. And here is that Storm Prediction Center. Slight risk out there. And really what we're targeting today is this significant hail threat. You can see that hatch area there. That's for the significant hail. It goes all the way up to DFW. So there's a chance even of some significant hail if that front goes up toward the DFW Metroplex there just to the southwest of DFW. Could be some very significant hail. And that hatch area extends all the way down into northern Mexico to the west of Del Rio. Where that hail threat is also good to realize out there. Two target areas if you guys are just joining me. One is just to the southwest of DFW, maybe encroaching on the DFW area there. You can see that nose of surface-based instability and no cap going all the way up to the DFW Metroplex. And in fact, near DFW, those surface winds are even more southerly out in that portion of the target area. Where down here you can see this capping inversion building in toward Del Rio. That could be the saving grace for the city there in terms of hail damage, as there is going to be quite a stout capping inversion just to the east of the Rio Grande River. But just to the west out there over the higher terrain, the southern high plains, the true southern high plains there of northern Mexico, definitely that capping inversion erodes, and there even is a chance of a supercell tornado threat out there over northern Mexico, and in addition to some large hail. Despite those 25-degree dew point spreads, I wouldn't be surprised if we actually get a 67, 68 dew point there on the Mexico side of the Rio Grande River. Let's take a look at the surface map first and see what some of those dew points are so far this morning. So here is the surface map. Over the target area closer to DFW, you've got dew points in the upper 50s. You're probably going to be talking about low 60s there. Surface temperatures, though, will be in the low to mid 80s. So you're still going to be talking about lower temperature dew point spreads than further south. But the best moisture down into southern Texas here, southwestern Gulf of Mexico, you get those dew points in the 70s. Deep South Texas, you got dew points in the 70s. And then those upper 60s are streaming northward through the Rio Grande Valley. Right now, you've got some fog in Del Rio with that moisture advection, 70 over 64 there. The dew points are just going to continue to rise throughout the day. You can see upstream, you've got dew point 66 there. Nearly the upper 60s dew points streaming up toward the Del Rio area, up the Rio Grande Valley here. So that's going to continue. Moisture advection is going to continue flooding this target area here of northern Mexico. Dew points on the other side of the mountains, of course, are a lot lower, into the 20s there. And then to the east of those mountains, that moisture is pooling up against those foothills. And northern Mexico here to the west of Del Rio, to the west of Eagle Pass, is going to be the prime place to target. Just not sure if it's necessarily safe right now to cross the border into northern Mexico. But if I were to target anywhere, that's where I'd want to be, is on the other side of the border, just west of the Rio Grande. Work in that zone out there. But really the low levels outside of that area in northern Mexico to the west of Del Rio, the low levels are just going to be a little bit muddy with this stationary front. Even though we do get a lot of CAPE, 2,500 to 3,000 CAPE here, this is at 20Z. There is a hint of a bit of a mesolow that could form over this portion of the front. And then you get more of a north-south orientation to that boundary, just upstream of that mesolow. So really targeting just to the southwest of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, where you get slightly backed winds right along this stalled out stationary front. Could even increase your bulk shear just a little bit. You can get the hint of these southwesterly winds over here. So really where these southwesterly winds meet up with the southerly winds in the warm sector along this stationary front, a narrow belt too of those easterly winds right in the vicinity of that boundary looks to be the most practical target this afternoon to get large hail. But really I'd like to be down here into northern Mexico to the west of Del Rio. I think that area looks just a little bit more favorable down in that zone. Better 700 winds on the Texas target. You get these southerlies, 20 to 25 knots. You do get a lot of warm temperatures down here near Del Rio, so it's a high risk, high reward type of a target. I could go down there in Del Rio and just sit there all day long and nothing will happen. That supercell could stay far enough on the Mexico side to where I won't even be able to see under it. But I did speak to a local one time when I was chasing down there last year, and he said that he sees multiple tornadoes every year, almost every year out there, just setting up shop in early spring near Eagle Pass, looking out to the west over the higher terrain. And he sees numerous tornadoes out over northern Mexico. So quite an interesting area down there. Great spot for herps too. Rattlesnakes, king snakes down there. Beautiful desert area, so a great spot to look for those reptiles down over in this portion of the Big Bend of Texas down into northern Mexico. But that looks like the target today. Looking at the composite reflectivity here. Pretty straightforward. This is at 3Z, so we go back toward 6 p.m. And you can see that monster supercell there to the west of Del Rio, just going nuts. Probably dropping softballs. Isolated noodle here and there. 25-degree dew point spread, so a beautiful sculpted supercell down there. Probably visible from Del Rio as well. But then we get these supercells further north across the southern Texas hill country that initiate down near Brownwood, southwest of DFW. And most of the models do show that thing intensifying into quite a stout hail producer with a 40 to 50 knot bulk shear out there. We do mix the dew points a bit. The HRRR shows more substantial mixing where those winds turn southwesterly, and slightly better dew points just to the southwest of DFW. And then you get this worked over air dominating East Texas, large portion of northern Louisiana, southern Arkansas there. So you're looking at a pretty narrow swath. But again, the best dew points, mid and upper 60s, are streaming up the Rio Grande here toward Del Rio. So I think the two target areas are this one, just to the southwest of Dallas, where you have slightly more backed surface winds, better dew points, and also with these southeasterlies streaming up the Rio Grande toward Del Rio. Also that potential target. But really we're looking at very large hail this afternoon, folks. And the mountains of Colorado are going to be interesting overnight tonight. We have an upslope type of an event that's going to get going. The timing of this snow is quite favorable, happening at night. This time of year with those higher sun angles out there across Colorado. If the snow ends up happening during the day, you can get quite a bit of rain happening here. There you can see a system diving to the south out of the Pacific Northwest. Let's pull up the NAM model, see how the NAM's doing out there with this snowfall, as the new NAM is just starting to flood in. I think late night tonight is when it really starts to begin. You start to flip around to upslope out there. Starting to get some cyclonic curvature. And this is by midnight tonight. You finally start to get that snow. Go over to the 6E models. Beginning late night tonight over the higher terrain. And then that upslope begins by tomorrow morning, including Denver. And the timing of the beginning of this snowfall during the morning tomorrow and continuing into the day during heating is probably going to keep those snowfall totals down in the immediate Denver area. This looks like more of a Tuesday night event to me. Does look like the initial wave comes in late night tonight through tomorrow morning. But there you can start to see that snow breaking out Tuesday night. A lot of cold air in place in Denver. I know the temperatures this morning are in the 20s. Look at this. Wow, interesting pattern. But really, when these systems close off over the Mountain West, that's when you got to watch the upslope potential across Colorado. Looks like a prolonged snow event, too, with this system just cutting off over the western U.S. You got another dual closed lows here with a subtropical connection ripping along the southern side. Pretty poor, pretty weird looking pattern, stagnant pattern with these two closed lows here. Subtropical connection ripping along the southern side. What the hell is this? Pretty fun pattern though if you're in Colorado. Eventually this thing's going to eject. We need to kick this low out of there. This one amplify across the western U.S. and we'll be talking about severe weather. But this pattern here is why we're having just a little bit of a break in our active severe weather pattern that we began this year with. It's like prolonged upslope across northeastern Colorado through this week. This is by Wednesday night. Still getting that upslope event there. Could get feet of snow in the foothills with something like this. It's like a couple different rounds of upslope being indicated. One tonight, a weaker round late night tonight. That continues through tomorrow morning. The foothills, maybe several inches, maybe a 2 to 4 inch type of a snow across the foothills of Colorado out there. Denver, not much by tomorrow morning from this initial first round. But the next round, Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, looks more substantial here across the foothills, including my apartment. Looks like the total between these two rounds tonight, the weaker round, 2 to 4 inches, then another several inches coming Tuesday night, leading to 1 to 2 feet there across the foothills through Wednesday morning. Not as much in Denver. This first wave will probably leave a trace. That'll melt, and then the Tuesday night system will arrive. Could leave a couple of inches. 3 kilometer NAM has more falling in the foothills to the west of Denver. Up to 2 feet up there, including my apartment. Areas like Eldora. The foothills, this is definitely a foothills event. Prolonged upslope. 3 kilometer NAM action here. Not much tonight. Looks like maybe Evergreen, Genesee areas could get 2 to 4, 6 inches. Late night tonight of fluffy snow, but I think that next round, Tuesday night, is going to be a little bit more substantial out there. But definitely an interesting winter type pattern with that closed low closing off over the western U.S., leading to at least a couple rounds of upslope. And there is a chance of 2 to 4 inches from this next round, Tuesday night into Denver. Maybe probably just a couple of inches, but the foothills definitely do get hammered to the west of Denver through that with those 2 pops of upslope. Basically, as those low-level southeasterly winds, moist and cold, get forced up the terrain, and especially the foothills where the rate of change of that elevation is greatest. If you're heading west on I-70 out of Denver, you notice as you get west of Denver in the foothills, you get the rate of altitude increase is dramatic there to the west of Denver, and that's where that upslope should be maximized. Unless the depth of the cold pool pushes that upslope out a little bit further, but that usually requires a stronger cold pool, a stronger upslope event, greater lee cyclogenesis. This one with more weaker, subtle upslope with that closed low off to the west. It's not as much of a dynamic system, and that will keep this upslope focused over this narrow north-south zone across the Colorado foothills to the west of Denver. And here's the GFS, also showing most of that snow to be west of Denver. Couple inches in Denver at the lower altitudes, but then you go into the foothills to the west of Denver, Genesee, up to the west of Boulder as well. The same areas that were hammered by those fires. So it's very important to just continue getting this precipitation out here, kind of anticipate the fire season ahead. Summer, there could probably be an early start to it with these La Nina conditions. I think the high plains are going to be very dry again this summer. And this end of the week pop of upslope looks even more substantial. And the GFS, again, is the big winner here, showing like 3 to 4 feet in the foothills off to the west. You're probably not going to get this much. The GFS has been pretty notorious for cranking out these insane snowfall totals, but this is going to be a prolonged period of upslope. And it looks like it's going to keep getting bigger and bigger with each wave. Tonight being the weakest wave that happens. And then when this system finally ejects, toward the end of the week, could even get some more upslope. Well, doesn't really eject out there, does it? And then we're going to be starting to get ready for that pattern shift that will usher in the end of April. A pretty active period expected. Well, at the very end of April is probably when we're going to get a pattern shift. But this is not a favorable pattern here around April 20th for severe weather. Getting this big ridge to build in here. This is definitely a sign of cold air intrusions into the central and eastern U.S. here in the long range. To get a big severe weather, you really need a trough ridge across the U.S. So the western U.S. needs to be dominated by a trough. The eastern U.S. needs to be dominated by a ridge. You get a big subtropical ridge too that dominates off the southeastern U.S. So this is the exact opposite of the pattern that is favorable for severe weather. So it looks like to close out April, We're going to be ending with a ridge trough pattern. And we've had a pretty active early start so far to this severe weather season. This could signify a breakdown of that pattern in the long range, a breakdown of that ridge. You know, sometimes it'll take just a small system like that to barrel in to that ridge to break it down. And then maybe we'll transition to more of a consolidated jet to close out the month of April. One single jet stream across the country, open waves traversing, and then that will lead to a more active traditional severe weather season to close out April, and then usher in a very active month of May. But this in the very long range, it looks like it wants to take the peak season and definitely force more of a ridge trough pattern, which should be quite unfavorable for severe weather during the end of April into May. But I suspect that May, the bottom is going to drop out of this thing, and we're going to be talking about a very active severe weather season across traditional Tornado Alley, just based on the timing of it all. No, we're looking way out there now, so there's really no value in looking that far out. Looks like that last upslope is going to be out by Friday, Thursday night into Friday. And it does depend on when these upslope regimes happen. So this will be Thursday. You still get this closed upper level low, a jet streak coming around the southern side. Still, you can see that upslope continuing there on Thursday, according to the GFS. So those are the two stories. We got hail producers today. We have prolonged upslope across the mountains of Colorado, foothills to the west of Denver as well. Could be some big winners through the week. Multiple rounds of upslope. Tonight's the wimpiest one. Maybe 2 to 4, 3 to 5 inches in the foothills to the west of Denver, above 7,000 feet. And then another round comes in Tuesday night into Wednesday. That could bring a chance of snow down into Denver. A couple inches there maybe. A little bit greater in the foothills. But I would say that we'll probably get a couple of feet there above 7,000 feet in the foothills to the west of Denver. But usually these types of events where you don't get a massive lee cyclone, a lot of times the upslope will be focused right over the immediate foothills to the west of Denver, with Denver kind of being spared with these more subtle upslope environments. Instead of having the ejection of a big-time bomb cyclone that'll come out, in this case you just get several different waves of enhanced upslope. And it does depend on if those waves come in at night. If they come in at night, they'll usually overperform. If those waves come in during the day, they'll underperform because the sun angles are so high this time of year that the melting will often exceed the rate at which the precipitation is falling. So my plan is to drop south into the southern Texas hill country for now. And then if I'm within range of Del Rio, I'll drop even further south. May even consider crossing that Mexico border. If there's a supercell and I need to cross the border to get to it, I definitely will consider crossing the border. But 2 target areas today, 2 big hail targets. Hail is going to be the main chase today. We got this one just to the southwest of DFW, and then we've got this one down into northern Mexico to the west of Del Rio. High risk, high reward target down along the Rio Grande, but guaranteed to get some big hailstones in the hill country just to the southwest of DFW, maybe even into DFW as well. So that's what I'm looking at, guys. I'm definitely recovering the nervous system. These last few days I made a couple dietary changes too. Ramped up my exercise a little bit even to try to accelerate the improvement, repair of the nervous system. But getting my pants on more effectively in the mornings these days for these briefings. So feeling pretty good. Back to Basics Tour 2021 Storm Chase mode continues. I'm going to head back though and finish the rocket launch paper, pick up Gizmo, and then once the paper's done, then I'm going to head permanently out to the Southern Plains, High Plains, head back to the High Plains edition there in Colorado, my apartment. I am considering moving back to Oklahoma though. It just feels like home here in Oklahoma, definitely. So I'm just going to continue this nomadic lifestyle for a little bit longer, but I am considering getting a farmstead out here in Boomer Sooner country and getting back to basics. But I do love Colorado. I also love South Carolina, where my family's located there in the southern Appalachians, 2 locations. But I'd probably just continue this nomadic lifestyle, doing cardio, doing science, rolling out Dominator weather stations, storm chasing as hardcore as I can, and also working the educational angle too. I am planning on returning to the Storm Chase EDU courses once I get back as well to South Carolina. We'll resume those, especially with this ridge trough pattern ahead. We're going to need to pass the time somehow. And also I want to recap many of these big events, the double high risk, the moderate risk there in the Texas Panhandle on March 13th, and break down some of these early season tornado events while they're still fresh in our mind. Do some hodograph plotting, some SQTs as well out here. But first I want to get some gorilla hail impacts on the Dominator Fore and get some new dents. Kind of ran out of gas there in the Southern Plains the other day. The old Reed would have chased the hail in the Southern Plains and worked that derecho all the way into the Mid-South and along the Gulf of Mexico coast. Then I would have seen those big-time hail producers in Orange Beach, punched it off to the northeast, probably got the tornado in Seneca, South Carolina, and then I'd already be finishing up the paper right now. But I'm in position, working on that nervous system recovery. I plan to be 100% by peak season, almost 100% now. And I could still dominate at 70% capacity, that's for sure. I'd be happy even just being 70% for the rest of my days. With medical advancements too, I do plan to chase for another 50 to 60 years or so. So maybe heading over to the Oklahoma City Men's Clinic here. So getting some performance enhancers, but definitely with medical advances, I do plan to chase for another 50 to 60 years. Today, though, targeting this area just to the southwest of DFW, slightly more backed winds, maybe a narrow belt, though, of easterlies right along that stationary boundary. Texas Hill Country, southwest of DFW, down toward Del Rio. Never stop chasing.